The Bosshole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode.
Well, hey, welcome back to the Bosshole Chronicles. This is Sarah Best. I'm your co-host, and actually today I'm solo because my partner in crime, John Brower, the Brofessor, as I like to call him, is out on assignment. But I could certainly not be more thrilled than I am today to introduce to you a subject matter expert of a unique and different kind than we've had on the Bosshole Chronicles before. Ben Snyder, lead pastor at Cedar Creek Church. Welcome to the Bosshole Chronicles.
Thank you. It's pretty exciting. I was telling a few friends that I'm going to be on the Bosshole Chronicles, and I got a lot of raised eyebrows, and some people were like, oh, okay, sounds about right. I'm like, what does that mean? So this is going to be fun.
Well, I think we're going to dig into that a little bit further. And in our world, Bosshole, well, you can actually put hole after any noun or pronoun, we've determined.
True.
But it's not that we intend to be that way necessarily, especially as we grow influence. You have brought influence over a large staff, very, very large congregation. They're just things that we want to dig into and understand. And we call it Bosshole prevention, Bosshole intervention. Burnout is a subject we'll touch upon today, but Ben, just absolutely thrilled to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
I love it. I actually love the title. I think it's compelling. I think nobody wants to be that. And we've all had experience with that. And for your invite to bring me into the space to speak, but also to learn what you're doing in our community is pretty inspiring. So thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Aw, well, that's awesome to know. Let me just tell our listeners a little bit about you. First of all, in the world of predictive index, you are a persuader. If I may, Ben, socially poised risk taker, a motivating team builder, things like self-confidence, a very persuasive, friendly, extroverted nature. You work at a fast pace. You're pretty informal. It's easy for you to delegate the details, probably the authority too, in most cases. You do your work with and through people. That be safe to say?
Oh, yeah.
Some of the things you need are independence, opportunities to interact with others, variety and change. So every day probably does look and feel and sound a little bit different, and freedom from rigid structure.
Yep.
And I think that you definitely are results oriented and certainly a charismatic kind of leader. And we would offer that any reference profile, any set of strengths also has a bit of a challenge or a downside. So sometimes you may say more, perhaps talk more than is needed. Sometimes you may provide limited attention to detail or follow through. Sometimes you may appear too casual or uninhibited. Would that be safe to say?
If my team were listening, they would all be going, yep.
Well, and we could say quite confidently that your superpower is, in fact, the way you so easily connect with others. And it's also the way you articulate ideas and stories. And from my experience of you, there's no accident that you're in the position that you're in because of these superpowers. They're well used.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've already alluded to it. The strengths of a leader have a shadow side that, if left unrestrained, can actually diminish the impact that you could have. And I think that's why the topic that you're addressing throughout your podcast here is so valuable.
Well, and I want to dig into that a bit further in just a moment, but let me just remind our listeners too that you are in fact the lead pastor of Cedar Creek Church, which is well known in the region here where we are. How many members in the church at this point?
Yeah, I would say attendees with COVID, it definitely has impacted some of that. So somewhere between the 6,000 to 8,000 size audience of attendees or people who regularly engage with us. So, yeah.
It's such a powerful and expansive group. And I know that number has grown, but you actually joined Cedar Creek in 1999 and you were part of an internship class there at the time. And through the years, you have been promoted, certainly drawn into many leadership roles, assumed lead pastor role in 2015. I know for a fact you have a beautiful wife and 4 children, and you are very grateful for their love.
Mm-hmm.
And you are an experience collector. I definitely
Yes.
want to hear more about that. Looking for new and creative things to add to your list of adventures. Lastly, that your passion is helping. And I want to just like shine a light on this, helping people become aware and unafraid of the dream God has for them.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, wow. So tell us about what it's like to be an experience collector.
I realized in part through some of the personality profiles, like the tool you use. But as I look back, I love looking for experiences that are out of the norm, that are either a story to tell, an opportunity to learn, something new to taste. An example of being an adventure or experience collector is when I go to a restaurant, I do not order. I tell the server after some explanation that she or he can order for me. They don't have to ask me any questions. And inevitably, they ask me a question. And I'm like, is that a question? It's like, I love to be surprised. I'm not picky when it comes to my food. And what I found is when I pick on the menu, I pick into a rut, the same 2 or 3 genre items. And what I miss out on are some of the other flavors and tastes of what that restaurant or what that server loves. And so it's been a fun way to eat. And when it comes to my calendar year, I try to look for fun, exciting adventures, learning experiences to go on. It gives me stories to tell and fun things to learn.
What I heard in there, which is transferable to even people experiences, is that you're very open-minded and probably very comfortable with risk. Like, you decide you're an expert on the food here, waiter. You tell me, you come and bring me what you think is worthy of this meal. And I think that's important when we think about working with other people. Like, hey, what does this person have to offer that in my rut, in my sort of, limited view, I might miss if I don't step back enough and let it happen the way it could.
Yeah, I feel like somewhere in the last 10 years, and so I'm not going to be able to quote my source, somebody told me a phrase that I've never forgotten, that your perspective may be right, but it's not complete. And so for me, it's like there have been times where I was so convinced that I was right and my perspective was complete. And once through pain, typically, or through an empathetic experience, I could see things from another point of view. I realized I'm not saying I was wrong per se, because you're not always wrong.
Right.
But I do begin to see that my perspective of whatever issue might not have been complete. And so when you start to open yourself up to that truth, it can be scary. But it's also I would say a more life-giving and a less boss-hole way to live. Doesn't always make it easier, but it does. I think it's a healthier way to live.
I agree. I mean, as you were describing that, I'm thinking bosshole prevention. Like that is the best way to not go down that road. That is powerful. Well, and you've held various positions in leadership, and I'm sure even before you came to Cedar Creek in 1999, like, wow, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, I was a 19-year-old college student that got invited to Cedar Creek. And
tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was spiritually on a journey, and I didn't fit the church stereotype at the time, big hoop earrings, spiky hair, love listening to Rage Against the Machine, that kind of stuff. And And, the idea of church is that it was a list of rules, and I didn't really check any of those boxes. And somewhere along the way, a girl, I don't remember her name, never seen her since, told me about Cedar Creek, invited me. And I remember walking in going, man, these people talk about life in ways that's authentic. They're not trying to fake it to make it. They're not taking themselves too seriously. And I wasn't given a ton of strange looks when I walked in, like, hey, you didn't dress the part, right? Yeah. And so I just started getting involved. And little did I know that journey over 15 years would lead me to where I'm at today.
That's a great story. It sounds like, you found a place to feel at home. Did you be yourself?
Yeah. I mean, you asked the question, have I worked for very many boss holes? And I mean, I think we've all had moments where there are boss hole type moments. I was out of college, I started working here, and I was the first intern. And so I've had the privilege of working for great people. And what's made that great to a large degree is just people being themselves when they show up at work and creating a safe environment for you to say, hey, it's not okay, or a safe environment to give feedback or to receive feedback and to grow into leadership, not just be expected to hit it out of the park every time.
Well, I love the phrase safe environment. Certainly, we've been talking a lot in recent weeks about months and years even, but about psychological safety. In your mind, Ben, what can a leader do, or what has a leader done for you to create that safety?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to try to answer initially that question. If you know my personality profile, I'm a verbal processor.
Yes.
If you watch movies, this is going to feel like a rabbit trail, but stay with me for a minute. If you watch movies, there tends to be a common thread underneath the heart of every movie, whether it's sci-fi or Marvel or a romantic movie or even a comedy. There seems to be a trend in movies that capture our hearts and make us laugh, that there is some father or family wound under the surface driving the person into the behavior that they have.
Yeah.
Understanding the wounds of your past, your wounds that you bring with you into the workplace. It's almost like they're subconscious. You don't always realize that they're there. But understanding your wounds and being aware that other people have family wounds or experiences from their past that have led them to where they're at today, help create an environment of empathy for you to yourself, so that can become the environment to grow and become a holistic, healthy, or a healthier version of yourself, but also to have a gracious disposition when other people show up in a way where it's they disconnect, they withdraw, they get defensive, they get aggressive. And I'm not saying you should allow toxic or abusive behavior ever, create healthy boundaries for that. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of times in our workplace environments, it's the little things over time. It's the little defensiveness. It's the little check out. They just check out every time it comes up, so we can't talk about it. It's the over aggression on a point or perspective. And a lot of that comes from wounds that you're carrying from your past.
I can't tell you how often it is that, in the work I do, and I bet you see this too, you can see it, you can hear it and feel it within that person. I was talking to somebody earlier today who's contemplating a job change, just feeling very undervalued. And I think what she recognized is she has been working hard to prove her knowledge and her value in an environment where it's like going to the hardware store for a loaf of bread. Like, they do not read the loaf of bread deal. And she's feeling like a failure. But the unconscious part, which you just described, Ben, is the part that probably all of us need to spend some time checking into and sorting through, becoming conscious of it. Because I think it's self-awareness, something we talk about all the time. Good leaders need this self-awareness.
Yeah, I think mental health or therapists or counselors have been given a bad rap. It's changing. Yeah. If you're a younger millennial, early Gen X or late Gen X, millennial leader, then having a counselor or a therapist has become more normalized. But if you're older than that, it's like you only do that if you're like, quote, crazy, or unstable.
Yeah.
And I think healthy voices in your life that help unpack some of the inner world. I had a friend tell me that it's really like heart surgery, and we're not talking about your physical heart. We're talking about your inner heart.
Yes.
How you define success. What is it that's most meaningful? What are you willing to sacrifice to get there? Why do you respond the way that you respond? When you do some root cause analysis of some of that stuff, that's not always fun or easy, but I think that's what leads to psychological environments of psychological safety. When you can bring that as a boss or an authority figure to your team, where my team just 2 weeks ago, my team was like, Ben, the way that you showed up at that meeting, it seemed a little defensive. And you came across in a way that may send a message that you don't trust X and Y's ability, this person or that person's ability to make decisions. I mean, this is my direct team coming to me saying, hey, here's how you showed up. Now, how could they do that without fear, right? Am I just a pushover and I just do whatever anybody thinks about me? No, we actually had a healthy conversation about what are the values, what was driving that, how can I come back to that team and reinforce that I trust them, but also reinforce the values that I'm not sure our team has heard me say before, or I want to reinforce them in a more life-giving way.
Yes.
A lot of that is possible because we understand some of that inner world and have spent time creating space to be aware, process that.
Well, in such practical wisdom, I mean, that's an actionable item to seek out support or someone to help you understand more deeply what could be driving the bus, and driving that need to be defensive, et cetera. Simple, but very actionable. Well, and you joked earlier, but, have you ever been one or worked for a boss hole? I think this is, the beginning of the road out of that. Empathy, designing a team and a team dynamic like you have, where people are able to say after the fact, hey, that, I might shift, I might change that a little bit next time if I were you, Ben. This whole idea of empathy and leader awareness, kind of going back to your idea of being open, being receptive to this kind of feedback, that can't be very easy.
When you talk about psychological safety, I think awareness of wounds that you're carrying is one thing. I think the empathy or openness to feedback is another, right? So when I was in college, I was a part of a student wellness awareness team, and we would do some facilitation for making healthy choices or wise choices in college. And so as a 19-year-old, I was invited to lead a group of 18-year-olds. As a 19, 20-year-old, I was leading facilitation, large group facilitation for 18 to 19-year-old college freshmen. And the facilitator that was over me, her name is Darcy Alt. She saw potential in me, put me in a position to lead the large group facilitation. And after every session, she'd be like, hey, Ben, these 2 things, awesome. These 3 things, let's change. And you're up in 5 minutes. And without even realizing it, looking back, I can see it now, but without even realizing it, it developed an aptitude for feedback. Like if you can bring somebody that you trust into your corner, right, that sees you, that has permission to correct you, but also sees your potential. If you have people like that around you and intentionally foster that kind of environment, what it does is it keeps you from becoming the emperor with no clothes, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's a leader's, that, they call it imposter syndrome or whatever. It's like you always wonder, am I getting the truth, or am I actually making a difference, or what if people really knew, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead, I just ask for feedback all the time. And what that does then is it makes you aware of other people's perspectives. And I think it's that feedback back and forth, then, if you can create that kind of environment, that is the soil that empathy begins to grow out of. Why? Because empathy is really being able to identify or connect with what somebody else is experiencing. You'll never do that if you can't hear it, can't receive it. And they won't be able to empathize with you if you don't have that kind of ability to give feedback back. Now, oftentimes bosses are always telling everybody what they think, right?
Sure.
But in a healthy culture, feedback goes both ways. And I think that, the superpower or the gateway to feedback is empathy. And what empathy allows is for more feedback or healthier feedback to be given. So it's like almost 2 sides of the same coin or part of the same process. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And my mind sort of spins with, I hope our listeners can tune in and appreciate practice, repetition, this aptitude you're talking about. It's not out of reach. It really isn't.
No.
And it's so elusive. It has been taboo in many environments. And some people are so afraid of it that they absolutely have built a wall to prevent that kind of engagement. But lucky for you, this gal, Darcy, who worked with you from day one, it was like business, like, hey, this is your job. Here's what you're doing right. Here's a couple of things to make it better. Go. And I want that. I want that on our teams. I want that kind of comfortability, that aptitude you're talking about, which probably just takes intention and repetition.
Yeah, you got to have people that you trust. And so trust is another key environment of psychological safety. Patrick Lencioni does a lot of great work on that. Yeah. So if you're looking for a practical resource to build trust, Stephen Covey Jr., I think, wrote the book called The Speed of Trust.
Yes, another good one.
So you start putting some of these pieces together. I mean, the fundamental framework that I went through when I became lead pastor, which changed the dynamic of all of my relationships, is I just used Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team as kind of the model that I was going to begin to step into. And so as you begin to work through those layers, that takes time. You create space for feedback back and forth. I think that's what begins to build an environment where eventually your team looks at you and is like, without fear and without it being hostile, Ben, you showed up in this way. And I don't think that's the kind of leader you really want to be. Or if you were showing up that way, maybe there's something that we need to learn that we were missing in the process. It's pretty cool.
It is. And it strikes me, Ben, that they care so much about you that they wouldn't want to let you fail or fall, that they would be brave and courageous enough to tell you this. And I think you're right. The roadmap that Lencioni put together, building trust, mastering conflict, achieving commitment, embracing accountability, attention to results. It's certainly one we use often with our clients. It's simple. It gets transformational dynamics happening on purpose. I mean, because let's face it, it's because we're messy, fallible, wonderful, amazing human creatures. And as he always says, put 5 or 6 of us together in a room and look out. Like, we're wired differently, but yet we have this opportunity. And so you've talked about a couple of things that really help to bring this forward. Open-mindedness, self-awareness, the intentional creation of psychological safety, the use of empathy. Gosh, these are all so powerful. The aptitude for feedback. Yep. I recall conversations I've had with you in the past, Ben. It's been an interesting 15 years for you, I'm sure. But since 2015, just how the dynamics have changed. And let's just zero in on the last 18 months to 2 years.
Yep.
Never before has there been a time like this where you and other leaders have been, stretched to the max, like to the point of potential breaking, and burnout comes to mind. And I think it is your level of leadership and managers too that have truly borne the brunt, if you will, of the challenge, the stress, navigating through crisis. It may not feel like a crisis now, but it's still ever flowing and changing. And, the future of in-person service, just as an example, the political climate. How have you fared? Like, how has this been for you as a leader? Where have you maybe been challenged and struggled, and what have you done, and what can you do and encourage other leaders to do to keep that bucket full?
Yeah. Well, if you have leaders that are listening right now, and I would say also if you have team members that report to a leader or have aspirations to be a leader someday, I think it's really easy to assume that every leader just lives in their ivory tower and has a simple time making decisions. And most leaders that I know, they're not arrogant, money grabbing jerks. They actually care about creating meaningful jobs and a meaningful purpose for the people who work for them. And they carry that very personally, privately, oftentimes keeps them awake at night. And I know most people that I know that serve on a team want to be a part of a life-giving environment. They want to work for a leader that they respect. And so never has that been challenged in my 20 years at Cedar Creek in any way like the last, we're going to be going on just over 2 years here on multiple fronts, right? So you've got the COVID, you've got lockdown, you've got the impact of the supply chain, that all of that, the different seasons, different times that started to impact. You also have a significant shift in customer or any lifestyle patterns. So you used to go to the gym and now you're working out at home. You used to go into work, now you're working from home. You used to go to the grocery store, now you're doing click list. All of these things are going to forever change how customers or your clients, whoever they are, or our attendees experience their experiences. And then you add into that the political climate and then the social justice issues that came to the fore that have been kind of simmering under the surface. It's complicated, and it leaves leaders feeling like, it has left me feeling like I'm never going to get it right. And all I have to do is say one thing wrong and I'm going to lose my staff, or I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to lose this, or, it's a quest to be perfect with the realization that you're never going to achieve that, and with significant potential consequences if you're off even a skosh. So last February, I was, after almost a year of this, I was just tired. Like I could sense that I was thinking about things that I had never thought about in my life. And some of that's February. Every February, in Northwest Ohio, it's dark. For me, how do you get out of those sorts of things? For some of you, you find yourself there. 40% of people are thinking about resigning. 75% of pastors are thinking about a brand new career. It's like, it's a pressure cooker that we find ourselves in. How I began to navigate that is I went back to my purpose statement. And I've done work through personality profiles and conversations where I've tried to boil down what my purpose is to a single sentence. I believe that God put me on planet Earth. And I believe that, I'm bringing a spiritual aspect to this, but I didn't choose to be born. And so I just believe that God thinks I'm supposed to be here. And when I look at the way that I'm wired and my past experiences, we do this in an experience called Growth Track. And I look at my personality and my passions. I believe that I am here. I am most alive when I equip people to become aware and unafraid of the dream that God has for them. So I'm not just equip and inspire people to be aware and unafraid. And that's true for me as a dad. That's true for me as a boss. But if Cedar Creek were to go away and I were to work for some corporation, that's who I would be when I show up. When I serve at the board of Cherry Street, I'm on that board to equip and inspire people to be aware and unafraid of the dream God has for them. And yes, we think through P&Ls and strategic plans and all of that stuff. But I came back to that purpose statement as a way as a compass to help me navigate a burnout phase. And then I leaned into my personality to go, what are the things that replenish me? How do I refuel the tank? And I've done some work on like, not what are the mind numbing things that I do, scrolling through social media, TikTok, binging on Netflix. Those are okay. But what actually adds energy to the tank? And those are things like exercising 3 days a week. Running is one of those things for me. I need to be learning something new. I need to be getting into mischief with my brother-in-law, which is looking for some adventure to go on where we're going to have a story to tell. It's stuff like that really I had to get back into the routine of, even though I didn't feel like it. And I would say a few weeks after that, talking to some life-giving friends, that's another key part of that. It's like I started to get my legs back and could lean in. Now, it doesn't mean it's perfect. And I still have moments where I drift into like, what is going on? But it's my purpose statement, my replenishment rhythm, and life-giving friends that keep me dialed into somebody's going to have to navigate this season. And so it just so happens that it's my time to do that at Cedar Creek today. That was a lot of info. I don't know if you can cut some of that out, but
no, I wouldn't cut a thing out. I mean, it's not lost on me. I don't, sit in your chair or stand in your shoes or interface with people the way you do. And certainly don't have the public relationship that you do with so many people. I think we were talking before we hit record about, how you go to the grocery store with your kids and people are like, hey, Ben, it's so good to see you with your kids. And you're like, hi, you, hey, nice to see you.
Yep.
And no frame of reference for, obviously they may know you and they recant, a service and a story you told and a great message you gave like 7 months ago and how it changed their life. Like, wow, that's a lot. But also, the downside of that is you are on the front line of opinions and feedback, and it's very, very social and public now. So it's not lost on me that you talked about that, but I'm sure the depth and breadth of the challenge of that was significant.
So one of my fears, or you call it an area of sensitivity, that I carry, it can manifest in insecurity. And it can look like a million things to probably people from a distance, but I want to be the kind of leader that the closer you get to me, the more you're like, man, who he is on the stage is who he really is. Like, he's not fake. I don't want to use the word despise, but it makes me really uncomfortable when you see a person one way that look, especially in church space, and then you get to know them privately. And it's like, I don't really like that person privately. They seem so much more X over there. I want to be the same person wherever you meet me.
Yes.
What's painful then, or my fear, is that the more people get to know me, they'll abandon me. They'll leave. They'll move on. And so it was provoked in so many ways because I didn't say it right. like one service, I said a phrase, or you just take, if I say these are trigger words for people: masks, wherever you're at on the issue; vaccines, wherever you're at on the issue; George Floyd, wherever you're at on the issue.
Yeah.
If you don't say it right, if you don't say it enough, if you don't say their point of view, then what comes with that is all of these other labels and accusations. And that's what's made this year hard. Is I've watched people disappear out of our church because I didn't say it right, or I didn't stump for a particular candidate issue, whatever. Yeah. And it's like you allowed one moment to discount years of time together. And I think that's the fragility that was exposed in the last 18 months, that I think, quite honestly, why everybody is still tempted to work in their home. And we've isolated ourselves from a relationship, and I don't think we've fully seen the ramification of all of that.
I appreciate your candor and vulnerability in sharing all that. And I also think that you've already outlined, your formula, if you will, for restoration and surviving through that, and even thriving at some point through that. I love the idea of a purpose statement. And I do hope our potential Bosshole listeners, anybody out there, I mean, no matter where you are, if you're unfulfilled and unhappy and unsatisfied with your work, and gosh, we talk to people every day who are, to go back to the purpose statement. What's your why? Why do you exist? Why are you here? And I love, for you personally, Ben, how you continue to incorporate adventure and fun. Because, right. there's a lot of depth to you, and there's incredible intelligence, but there's that side, I think, that appeals to many people, which is adventuresome and quirky and funny and not afraid to pull a prank. But to bring that into your experience again, because it's probably the first thing that would go in the face of all this stress and tension and apathy and depression. Would you agree?
Yeah, I can get serious and focused and passionate. But I like to work hard and play hard, is the way that I like to say it. And if it's all work hard, then I get grouchy and no fun to be around. I don't even like being around myself. But if it's all play and we're not moving anything forward, I get bored, and I don't feel like that's significant either. So what I like to do is I like to have a healthy dose of both. And I think it's possible. And that's the kind of work environment that we're trying to create here.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think the other couple of things you mentioned, which are essential, which I think sometimes people put on the back burner, it's that self-care. Certainly the physical self-care, the exercise, the moving your body, whatever it is that we need to do to keep the endorphins flowing, to keep the mind and the body healthy. And then surrounding yourself, you call them life-giving friends, surrounding yourself with people who live, essentially above the line. Their energy, their thoughts, their actions are life-giving.
Yep. I think the number one asset that I bring my team, or the flip side, I am at most risk to be a boss hole, right? In the full negative sense, is when I'm not paying attention to the energy that I'm bringing to the room. And so what do I mean by energy I'm bringing to the room? That's not just physical energy, though that's a part of it. It's my mental, emotional, spiritual being that I am bringing to any environment. As a leader, that I believe is the secret sauce. And by energy, that means the best of your personality. As a persuader, I need to be aware of the best, which means I also need to be aware of the shadow side and where that can come out. And when I'm tired, when I'm defensive, when I'm insecure, if I am that, I just need to own that at the beginning of the meeting. Guys, I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling a little unsettled about this, but it allows the room to know where I'm operating from, how I manage that energy, how I make sure I protect or keep that energy tank full is the best asset that I bring any team that I'm a part of.
Wow. And that is certainly incredible advice that I hope every potential bosshole out there tunes into. And I know it's not easy. It's a full-time job, probably tuning into and managing and being aware of that. And I'm guessing that you give yourself grace the same way you do your team members and other people. I'm hoping so, Ben, that you allow yourself to be where you are. And by sharing, hey, I'm not, my typical self today. I'm lower in energy.
Yeah, I would say it's a challenge, but yeah, you gotta do that.
Wow. And how cool that you probably create that environment for your team to be able to do the same.
Yeah, I would say, and if you're looking for a practical, like how do you manage that? I would break your being into 3 dimensions: a mental being, like your mental, emotional, what are you thinking and feeling?
Yes.
Physical, what is your body doing? And then I would say for us, spiritual would be the 3rd dimension. And this is where you get into purpose. And I would say things that are going to last beyond you, right? Or the eternal part of you. When things aren't going well in you and in your team, but in you, I would say the first thing to do is get curious. So instead of scolding or the fundamental attribution error with somebody else, it's like, why? I wonder why they're reacting that way, or why am I fatigued, and or why am I aggressive here, or why am I having a hard time paying attention to the details? If you get curious, you can learn something pretty powerful, or at least you can begin to create a more productive conversation. There may be something under the surface in you. There may be an issue. There may be an idea, a lot of different things. And then you can do that with your team too. When they show up, instead of going, they're just a jerk, or they don't support me, or they're being disloyal, or, they're being lazy. Most people that I know don't wake up going, hey, how lazy can I be today? Right. Most people want to work hard, but there may be something underneath the issue that you've got to do some root cause analysis with. And getting curious I think is a great motto for life. Stay curious. That keeps me from being critical, cynical, overly competitive. I think competition is good. I think it can get overboard, stuff like that.
That is rich. It really just makes me want to say, hey, we want to seek you out in a few months, when the next season, the next cycle starts within the church space, just to hear, how things are evolving for you. These ideas that you shared today, Ben, are just so straightforward and practical, but yet transformational. I mean, yeah. I totally get that sense. What's up next for you? I know we're in the middle of, in the church season, it's Thanksgiving all the way past. Tell our listeners what you share with me about January and how that works.
So we're in the Christmas is big at Cedar Creek. We'll probably see somewhere between 15 to 20,000 people experience Christmas with us, which we love. It's kind of a Glass City tradition. And then in January, just like the gym, a lot of people love Jesus in January. It's like a new year, new me. And so January is a busy season for us. This January, and I'm not sure when this is going to air, but this January, we're actually doing a series called At Your Best. And we're going to be talking about some of these things. Nice. Both spiritually and practically. And I think that's what, in Jesus' day, I think that's what a lot of people appreciated about him, is he wasn't just speaking some elusive, ethereal, spiritual talk. He anchored it in practical, everyday life that helped people be at their best. And maybe not the way the culture defined every term. I think God actually wants you and me to be at our best. He wants us to thrive. And I feel like we all want that, but we find ourselves going through the motions, overwhelmed, overworked, overexhausted, and we don't always know how to get out. So that's really what we're going to be talking about in January. And I'm excited to help people grow in this area, no matter where they work or how old they are.
Well, I promise to include in our show notes, Ben, access to the website and to ways that our listeners can tune into that series and find out more about you and even Cedar Creek Church. I think that would be powerful. We'll make sure we include that in the show notes. And I just want to say, I find you to be a very incredibly special person. I always have. I don't regularly attend Cedar Creek. I do often as a guest.
Yep.
But your take on people, your take on leadership, it is worth gold. And I just wanted to say that. I think you're incredible. I think you're gifted to be where you are. I think you're courageous to be where you are, and keep up the great work, Ben.
Yeah, I feel like our paths crossed, I don't even know how many years ago. And you have a way of bringing a joyful, humorous, inspirational, but also very practical light to leaders and to just any person that you meet. So it's fun to be partnered up together in different ways, trying to make our community better. And I think you're one of the best. So thanks.
Well, hey, coming from you, that's a huge compliment. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
And happy holidays to you. Merry Christmas to you and your family. And
Thanks.
I hope you'll take us up on an offer. We'll see you again in the future on an episode of the Bosshole
Anytime.
Chronicles.
Anytime I can be reminded not to be a boss hole, I think that's important. And anytime we can kind of learn and share together, I think that's good for everybody.
Hear, hear. Well said. Thanks again, Ben. And we'll see you next time on the Bosshole Chronicles.
We'd like to thank our guest today on the Bosshole Chronicles. And if you have a Bosshole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.